Hello and welcome back to Mossy Bottom on this October day. As many of you now know, 3 years ago I purchased a derelict old cottage with an acre of overgrown land here in the west of Ireland. And I'm on a mission to convert the land into a self-sufficient smallholding and restore the cottage, hopefully to its former glory as a working farmhouse and a cosy home to boot. Unfortunately, in the last 3 years, I haven't made quite as much progress on the cottage as I had hoped. And that's partly because I've been working to try and pay for materials and studying and getting hopelessly distracted by establishing the land, the animals, and working on the outbuildings and countless other things, which are all still works in progress, as you know. But it's also because I simply haven't had the funds to do the big jobs needed for the restoration. Something which, to be honest, I knew when making the decision to relocate here. For me, this was always going to be a labour of love and the fulfilment of a dream. And if that takes me 5 years or 10 years or even a lifetime to complete, then so be it, really. So this video is going to be all about the cottage, except I'm going to split it into 2 parts. In the first part, I want to give you a tour of how the cottage looks now, and prepare yourselves for a bit of a shock, because when I described it as a ruin in some of my other videos, I really did mean it. And in the second part, I want to talk through my plans for the restoration, how I'm going to bring it back to life. And here it is. Now, this was originally a farmer's cottage with land extending all the way back up the valley, kind of surrounding it, something like 20 or 30 acres, so quite a substantial amount. And the original occupants would have kept cattle on it, grown oats, and there's a granary where the oats would have been stored, and also quarried stone. It's very, very stony ground here, and there's a big sort of area where they were digging it out. And that very stone, which was quarried just over the hill up there, was then used to build the cottage. It doesn't get much more local than that. And it was probably built by the first farmer who lived here. As you can see, the stonework isn't of the highest quality, especially if you compare it to some of the later buildings that were made. The records I've seen date the cottage to pre-1908. I know at that point it was occupied, so it's at least 110 years old. But I suspect it's probably quite a bit older than that. Now, it would originally have had a thatched roof, again sourced locally, which would have been quite a bit lower than the current roof. At some point in the 1970s or 80s, I think, the roof was raised. It was quite a common practice with these old cottages here in Ireland, and replaced with the corrugated steel, which you can still see up there now, which has been painted many, many times and is still in surprisingly good condition. And the exterior walls were then rendered with concrete. As you can see, there's a bit left there. I've removed most of it. It would originally have had a lovely lime render, which I'm hoping to put back, with the addition of some hemp, hopefully for insulation. One of the things I really loved when first viewing the cottage was that dark green door. As you can see, it's in a terrible state right now, and it's going to need completely replacing because it's rotten through. But when I do, I'm going to paint it that same colour. And believe it or not, the lock still works, and this is the key. They don't make many keys like that anymore. So I'm going to have to get out my trusty torch because it's quite dark in here. One of the things you'll notice is that there are not very many windows. 3 very small, very old, very rotten sash windows, which have definitely seen better days, but it means that very little light gets into here. And I think that's one of the main things that people didn't like about these old cottages. They were very, very dark. And everyone that I've shown round to this point, the first thing that they say is, gosh, it's so dark, it's so gloomy. How could you live in it like that? And it's definitely a bit of a problem, and something that I have a solution for, which I'm going to talk about in the next video. You can see I've got my horseshoes upturned on the outside, which I found in the land That's supposed to catch you wealth, apparently. I could do with a bit of that. So the cottage is about 4 meters deep by about 11 meters wide. So barely 44, 45 square meters in terms of floor space. Very, very small. I suppose you could say it was the tiny home of its day. But then the reality is that most homes back then, when this was made, were really small. You know, a bigger home meant the heat would be spread out more, which people just couldn't afford to do, because this would have been heated by burning wood and peat. There was no electricity, there was no gas. The only source of heat would have been by burning things. So they would have wanted to keep it nice and small, just for the purpose of retaining as much heat as possible. Another thing you'll notice, there's absolutely no insulation. No insulation in the floor, in the walls, or in the loft area, in the ceiling. So it would have got mighty, mighty chilly in the winter. They would have had to keep that fire burning non-stop just to stay alive, I think. Now you'll probably have noticed that there are no dividing walls in the cottage. Now there would originally have been, this was divided into 3 rooms. Probably one will have been the kitchen area in the middle, and then bedrooms or sitting rooms on either side. But unfortunately I had to remove the stone which divided the rooms, because what's happened is the external front wall has subsided over the years, so it's dropped down and separated from this internal wall. So effectively it wasn't connected, particularly around the lintel area over the door. So I had to completely remove that. It's very, very dangerous. There were loose stones and falling stones. So I completely removed this dividing wall, and you can see what's left of it now is just these bits of stone at the top. And on this side, you can see where I've extracted the stone from the wall, which is, of course is all going to be put back and rebuilt. And this little alcove is absolutely amazing. This would originally have had 2 or maybe even 3 bunks in it, and it's not very wide at all. It's maybe a metre and a half, something like that. So you couldn't sleep an adult in there. It can only have been for children. And the hearth, the main hearth, would have been right here. So the children would have been sleeping, you know, within a few meters of where the hearth was for the fire, so it would have been lovely and snug in here. And most of these old cottages had this feature. As you kind of drive around, you see them. It's a very typical thing to see. But it's incredible to think that this basically would have been the bedroom for the children, and they would have been jammed in there where it was cozy and warm. And this is the back door to the cottage, which is lovely and thick and wide. Not very high though. I have to dip down to get through it. It's probably only about 5'8", something like that high. And you can see lovely big old iron latches, and someone's added a coat hanger at the back as well, and lovely big hinges. And another one of those old locks with a key in that still works. So the floor, you can see here, has been covered in concrete, and I'm guessing they did that at some point in the 70s or 80s when they did the external render. It would originally though have had flagstones, and it's so sad that they've been removed, because I would have attempted to restore those if they were still here, but it's basically just concrete poured over dirt right now. So looking up into the loft area, you can see the framework of the original roof, and that's where the thatch would have sat on top of that. And what they've done when they've modernized it is they've cut the beams off, raised the wall up about a foot, and built a new framework for the roof on that raised wall with new wall plates and joists and everything. So this lower framework is the original height of the ceiling inside the cottage. And up there is where the original chimney poked through the roof, which of course I had to remove one stone at a time because it was terribly unsafe. There were stones falling off left, right and centre, so it was a real hazard to be anywhere near it. So that entire wall had to be removed. And for the moment, I've just replaced it with a little framework with some corrugated iron on to keep the rain out. But it's going to have to be completely rebuilt at some point. There is literally a huge hole in my roof. And this very funny looking chair was the only item of furniture which was left in the cottage when I moved in. It's just about the most uncomfortable chair I've ever sat on in my life. I can't believe that anyone would purchase it. I think it's just been made from some old scrap bits of wood and left here. But I can't bring myself to throw it out because it's still part of the character of the cottage. If I shine my torch up there to the ceiling, you can just about see what looks like a black piece of hardboard attached with a light fitting on. But in fact, that has been stained black by the smoke that's billowed up from the hearth where peat would have been burnt for decades. And it would originally, that panel, have been white. So years of burning peat has literally turned it from white to black. Quite remarkable. There he is. One of Moss's favourite things to do in here, of course, is hunt for rats. And this may horrify some of you, but the walls, I'm afraid, particularly in the winter, are absolutely littered with rats because they get into all the cavities, and I guess it's nice and cosy and warm in there. So that's going to have to be dealt with at some point. But Moss certainly likes to come in and prowl around, see if he can sniff them out. Don't you, Moss? Yes, good boy. So this is now the only remaining chimney breast and fireplace in the cottage. And believe it or not, it does work. I tested it and the smoke went up. Obviously, it needs properly cleaning and a lining putting in there before it's used. But it's nice to have at least one fireplace left that I can still use. I don't know if I stick my camera under there, maybe you can even see up. There you go. You can see daylight. This section gives you an idea as well of what the walls would have been like. This is all lime render. It's very, very soft, very crumbly. It feels nothing like concrete at all. It just crumbles to powder in your fingers. And it's been painted many different colours over the years. There's a green and a yellow and what looks like a pinky peach colour, not to my taste, and a darker yellow here, which I quite like. Probably lead paint, I would imagine, as I think they're 50 plus years old at least. But it's really interesting being able to see kind of back in time the layers of paint and the different aesthetic choices that were made by the people that lived here. And this little alcove I think is really cool because when I first moved in it was boxed over with plasterboard, and I knew that there was something behind there because if you tapped on the plasterboard it was hollow. You could hear there was a cavity. And I eventually ripped it off and uncovered this little space with very rotten shelves and lots of cave spiders living in there, which I've since evicted, I'm afraid. And a few other little gems hidden away, sealed into the wall, which I'm going to show you now. So here's the treasure that I found stashed in the alcove in the wall. First of all, an old hand mirror. Seen better days. It's remarkable to think someone sat here and probably did their makeup in that for many decades. And then we have some coins, and I think this one has religious significance. Of course, the the family that lived here, like all Irish people back then, would have been deeply religious. It's a very, very Catholic culture and society, so I'm sure religion was a very important part of their lives. Guardian angel, pray for us. And then we have some spectacles, which I'm sure were worn for a great many years. This is the newer pair. I haven't tried them on. And the older pair, my goodness. Look at those. They're quite stylish, actually. I wouldn't mind a pair like that. And finally, the pièce de résistance, an old pipe, which I rather like, even though I've never smoked a day in my life. Falcon, made in England. I think it's been chewed on by something, probably the dog. But not bad, not a bad little haul to find in a hidden alcove in the wall. One of the most remarkable things about this cottage is that before I bought it, it was lived in by an old lady in her 80s. She was born here with the rest of her family, and after her parents died, it was just her and her brother. And her brother unfortunately died very young, I think in his 40s, of cancer. So she was left then by herself for the whole rest of her life in this cottage, which is in a very remote rural location. It's 1 kilometre to the nearest neighbour. And she wouldn't have had a car, so it would have been quite isolated. And bear in mind as well, this cottage isn't at all insulated. And there's no plumbing at all. There's no running water, no bathroom, no toilet. But she somehow managed to survive here and probably had a really happy, productive life all the way into her 80s. It's the most incredible thing, and a testament really to this way of life, I think. Back out into the light. That's just about it for this video, but if you'd like to know more about my restoration plans, then do stay tuned for part 2. I'm going to be talking about how I plan to divide up the space, bring more light in, hopefully without destroying the character of the cottage, utilize the loft area, and of course practical things like insulation and plumbing and that sort of thing, which at the moment are non-existent. As always, a huge thank you for watching and subscribing, and particularly for being extra patient with this video. I know it's been a long time coming. It may be quite a while before I have the funds to complete the restoration, so please, if you can, continue to be patient. There'll definitely be lots more videos to come featuring the cottage, and everything that I do I'm going to record and share with you guys. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye for now.